Welcome back to the Lift Free and Diet Hard podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Coates. Join me along with industry leaders and friends on a quest to get more people through the gym door and eating and living healthier. Join me where evidence meets empathy while rejecting fitness industry fads and extremism. Let's begin. Tim Riley. All right, been looking forward to this one for a while. We were just chatting off air, and a little bit about you. You are a strength conditioning coach with high-level athletes all the way up to pros. You still work with a lot of general population clients as well. You are the host. This is probably the thing that's standing out and getting a lot of attention. The host of the Coach 'em Up podcast. I've been binging your guys' podcast, you and Zach Zillner. You guys have had incredible guests. It is awesome. I actually think everybody should go and check that out. Definitely geared towards like career development and performance. So I used to do a lot of career development stuff. Now it's more gen pop, which I'm enjoying. You, as a kid, you were a multiple time national Brazilian jiu-jitsu champion before it was popular. But you still been a multi-sport athlete, even into adult, including MMA. It's great to have you on.
Thank you, man. What a incredible introduction. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. And I appreciate you having me on. I'm super excited. And, we were talking off air about some of the guests you had on recently. And I'm thinking, my God, like these are the people I'm going to have to follow. Like I might be in some trouble here.
Sandwich somewhere in between Brad Schoenfeld, Joel Jameson, Spencer
come
Steve,
on.
right?
Yeah.
Lauren Colenso-Settle, Stan Efferding. Yeah, I hope everybody's been enjoying these.
That is rare air. So it is truly I'm not just being polite. It's an honor to, be sandwiched in between industry leaders and greats like that. So very cool.
Well, you're standing out as one yourself and you're giving back with that podcast. So, and that's one of the best vehicles to get in front of more people. So I had to bring you on. Let's go into it. You've been pretty open about, let's charitably call it a colorful past when you were younger.
Yes.
Alcohol, drugs, importance was sports and strength training for leaving that behind.
Yeah. So, funny, it was like most of my life growing up, like my first escape from reality and just, dealing with life on life's terms was sports. And I would spend hours and hours and hours in the driveway pretending I was Michael Jordan, 3, 2, 1, fadeaway jumper, sticking the tongue out, the whole thing. And as I got older and I started drinking and using drugs and getting in with the wrong crowd, sports was one of the first things to be taken away from me. As it turns out, you actually have to attend school to be able to play on the team. That's a thing. That is a thing. You also have to have grades that would reflect a certain level of commitment for you to be able to play. So sports, they're taken away from me. And I'm in this sort of wilderness after that where I was like, wow, like I didn't really have anything else to kind of keep me in check. And so once I took sports away from myself, I had no boundaries at that point. And so things got really out of control and they were out of control for a long time. But whenever things would get real bad and my life would fall apart, part of the rebuilding process would always be being in the gym and like going to the gym and train. And by the way, I didn't even like training while I was actively participating as an athlete, most of my career, at least. I didn't like it. It was hard. It was uncomfortable. The only thing I liked was to get like a sweet bicep pump, and like I wanted abs. I wanted a girlfriend. Don't get me wrong. You know what I mean? But then once sports were gone, the only thing that was left was the training piece. And that was always something that I could return to. And it kind of turned into like this safe place for me that I could always go back to when things got really out of hand. And then there was also like a vanity piece. Frankly, like my whole goal, I wanted to be as jacked as possible because I wanted to date pretty girls. I mean, that was really kind of where I was at, especially in my teenage years. Fortunately, for me, it's not just this like vanity, sort of like Hail Mary situation when things get bad. Eventually I got to a place in my life where it became very clear to me that if I didn't change my life, that I was going to end up in prison or dead like most of my friends. And, when I had that rock bottom, time and I went to rehab and I moved from Nashville, Tennessee and moved to South Florida and got in a halfway house, no car, no phone, no job. my first job was at an LA Fitness selling personal training. And I didn't even know what I was getting into. But, I gravitated right back towards the gym. And man, from there, my career was sprung. And so, yeah, training has always been there. It's always been kind of lingering underneath the surface. And I was always able to return to it. And I never knew that it could actually be like the answer, like the thing. And I'm grateful that it turned out that way.
This episode is brought to you by KNKG, my favorite gym bag brand. For years, I did two stupid things. I bought cheap gym bags, which eventually fell apart, and I traveled with and checked a big suitcase. KNKG changed all that. In 2020, my aunt bought me a KNKG. Back then, they were known as King Kong duffel bag. Here it is. 5 years later, it's still indestructible. And last year, I spent hours on YouTube researching backpacks for travel. And I kept coming back to the KNKG Edge, which now goes everywhere with me. Travel, gym, work. I also just got a KNKG Conquer backpack and their Plus duffel bag. And these are both perfect for the gym. My main issue is I have too many bags and I can only use one at a time. Investing in high quality gear means you save money in the long run too. And I can save you guys 15% on yours. Go to www.knkg.com/Andrew59676. That's www.knkg.com/Andrew59676, or go to the link in the show notes. It's funny how many people in our space. I've got a whole episode with my friend Brad Jensen, the sober bodybuilder, and his whole thing is, again, jail and, pretty rock bottom type stuff. I've been open about the fact that I used to be a nightclub owner in my mid-20s, and with that came a pretty wild lifestyle. Our stories are not dissimilar in that, here I am working out in a gym, and then the staff kept bugging me to come work there as a trainer. That's how my career got started. And I look around now, and I sometimes feel like the turtle on top of the fence post. Like, how the hell did we get here? Yeah. So I don't know. And then two of us are talking on a podcast, right? There was something you said in there, the way you use the language, I love it. I want to grab onto. You took it away from, I took it away from myself. You didn't blame the world. You didn't scream at anybody else. That statement casually was like, I was the architect of what happened to me. Talk to me about that.
Well, so if you would have asked me during that time if everyone else was to blame, I would have told you no, but that would have been a lie. Subconsciously, what I believed is that, if my dad had just been a drug addict, if my mom didn't date such abusive boyfriends, if XYZ it didn't happen, if everything, it was just the way everyone else was acting, the way everyone else was behaving. If everything else could get in line, then I would be okay. And if I could just change how I felt, then everything would be okay. And that kept me sick and unwell for a really long time until I was eventually confronted with the fact that I was making my own decisions. And that can be a hard pill to swallow, but actually it's the greatest gift you can imagine, because if you're the problem, then you also have the opportunity to be the solution. You are the writer of your own story. Now, part of that, was me being honest with myself and being confronted with the truth that I got me here. No circumstances didn't get me here. People, places, things, they didn't get me here. I got me here. And if I wanted to get out of here, I was going to have to be the one who started taking action and doing things differently. Now, part of that process, especially in the beginning, started with the help of others. Here's the truth. And this is something we were kind of talking off air on about, some of the bad actors in the industry. Nobody is self-made. There isn't a fucking person on planet Earth who is self-made. Anybody who has ever made anything and done something great had people who helped them along the way. They had mentors. They took direction from other people. Someone gave them a boost at just the right time. Very few people have completely blazed a path and changed the trajectory of their lives and the people around them all on their own. So in the beginning, I needed a lot of help, a lot of recovery, a lot of therapy, a lot of friends being willing to support me. But through the love of other people and me taking responsibility for where I'd gotten myself in my life and taking responsibility for and here's the other thing too. Like, I got sober. I was still 12 years old. I was completely immature. I didn't know how to handle relationships. I didn't know how to navigate emotions. I didn't even have the words to describe what I was feeling. I just felt things and reacted. I didn't even have the ability to describe what was going on, right? So I was starting at ground zero in a lot of ways, but I was growing up in public as a 25-year-old air quote man. You know what I mean? Um, so yeah, that process was not easy. It hasn't been easy, but it's been, the greatest investment of my life is taking ownership of my life and, what I can do. And then that translates into other things. It's like, okay, well, this interaction, I'm having a problem with my boss, right? Okay. Well, I can say, well, that boss is just a dick. Or I can say, he's going to show up however he's going to show up. What can I do to mend this relationship and be the best version of myself so that we can have a better relationship moving forward? One puts the ball in your court and the other one leads you to being a very resentful, unhappy son of a bitch. And I choose to be happy. I choose to be happy, man. And trust me, I'm not perfect. That's it. You, anyone listening to this, you're never going to rise above human, right? But I can aspire to be that better version of myself. And I can choose to do that on a day-to-day basis. And I do believe that if I focus on progress, I'll never be perfect, but I'm going to be better than who I was 2 weeks ago, 2 years ago, 10 years ago. Right. And I certainly give myself a much bigger opportunity to be the person I want to be in 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years moving forward.
This episode is brought to you by Renaissance Periodization and the RP Hypertrophy app. RP is the industry leader in muscle building, coaching, and education. And this app is like having a coach in your pocket. It gives you everything you need, including training programs, form videos. It gives you all your sets, reps, and weights, so you just show up and follow the plan. It adjusts each week based off your progress. And the app was created by Dr. Mike Isertel, Nick Shaw, and the team at RP, who I've known for many years. And the entire team are incredible people who've always been supportive and generous with me, so I know their character and are easy to endorse. My library contains several RP books, and I've used RP training principles in my workouts and coaching with my clients for many years, long before the explosion in popularity of their YouTube channel, which is worth checking out. RP is the first sponsor I felt remotely comfortable endorsing after over 7 years of podcasting. And if hiring a one-on-one coach isn't for you, using the RP Hypertrophy app is the next best thing to maximize your gains and take the guesswork out of your program. And there's a 30-day money-back guarantee, so you can try it risk-free. If you don't like it, they'll give you your money back. And I've also got a serious discount for you of up to $50 US. Go to rpstrength.com/coats and use the code COATSRP, or go to the link below in the show notes, and that's rpstrength.com/coats. Use the code COATSRP. How much of this attitude is a narrative that is, looking backwards, connected dot backwards, survivorship bias, because you have the benefit of actually coming out of it? And how much of it is like, this was genuinely how I felt in the moment?
Yeah, I'm sure it's somewhere in the middle. Like I would say, like, going through what I went through, right? I only know one way to get through it. And that's the way that I did it. Like, I have my experience. If I share anything else, then it's just theory and I'm full of shit. You know what I mean? I'm making it up. And so I don't think that you have to have gone what I went through in order to arrive at this place of like what some people would consider like extreme ownership, right? Of trying to take responsibility for me and who I am and my circumstances, and focusing on that instead of other people, places, and things. But I only know my story. And so I can only speak about like how I was able to do it. And so, people ask me like, hey, how do I approach a situation? Or I rarely give advice. I'll say, well, here's my experience. And then if I don't have experience on something, Andrew, I'll say, hey man, I don't know. And that's helped me as the coach,
There is power in the words, I don't know, or I don't have an opinion on this. I am not qualified to have an opinion on this, because we live in a world where everybody expects you to have, and here's the thing, they want you to have an opinion on all kinds of stuff. And this usually gets into kind of like complex social political stuff, but it's not that they want you to have opinion. They want you to very loudly share their version of their beliefs, right?
Mhm.
Whether you believe it or not, they want you to say the right thing. So I just reject that shit, but that's a different conversation. Okay, I want to get into some of the wisdom from your coaching experience, and I like this one. How do you build muscle without losing athleticism? And there's sort of like a false premise even in the question. So take it away.
100%. So I think that there has been a narrative for a long time that if you train to build muscle, that also means that you're training just like a bodybuilder. And there's also a false narrative that if you're training like a bodybuilder, whatever that means precisely, that you're then going to become a bodybuilder. Like as if it were easy enough to be prime Phil Heath. Like if you just, oh my God, you wake up one morning and suddenly you're so muscle bound that the idea of doing, a reverse layup feels tough, which by the way, people don't know Phil Heath, former collegiate basketball player, just saying. So,
and he was jacked in
out of his mind.
A basketball jersey. Yep.
He was. So, there's several, and then by the way, and then also too, there's layers to this. So it's like, what does it mean to train like a bodybuilder? Typically people say, oh, it's you train in a certain rep range, you're training just for aesthetics, and you use isolation movements. These things are not air quotes functional. Okay. Functional, that fucking word, only applies within the context of what it is you're trying to accomplish. So it's a nebulous word. Functional is not this. It's a matter of what are you trying to, what are the circumstances and what are the criteria you're trying to meet as it pertains to the stimulus you want to elicit and the goal you're trying to get to, right? That's a more active, dynamic definition of functional, at least in my mind. But so here are misconceptions. And I fell victim to some of this. So when I first started training and I wanted to train to be more athletic, I was playing pickup basketball. I'd been a former athlete. It was kind of what I was missing in my life. And at the time when I was first getting certified and first working with clients, it was, you don't use machines because that's what bodybuilders do, right? You never do an isolation movement, a leg extension, a seated calf raise. Slow down, Ronnie Coleman. You know what I mean? Those things are going to make you slow and unathletic because bodybuilders do them, right? Which even as I say it out loud now, I know how absurd that is, but I only know that now because I've seen how beneficial utilizing machines, traditional hypertrophy rep ranges, training close to failure, improving body composition, bringing up lagging body parts that are impeding an athlete's ability to perform at where they want to perform. The more you get into the athletic training space, the more you understand that bodybuilding and athletic performance are not so dissimilar. The key elements are very much so the same. In fact, I'd make the case bodybuilding is an extreme example of trying to be the best at one quality, right? The same can be said for almost every sport, particularly like a track event, right? Like you have to dial in and know precisely what it is you need to accomplish to attain a certain ideal. And like the idea that like, okay, if I'm a running back and I don't have the quad strength, I'm a high school collegiate running back. I don't have the quad strength to be able to plant my leg and make a juke move to go the other direction and make you look stupid. But I'm not going to do a leg extension to target that muscle because it's less functional or it's what bodybuilders do is absurd. So in my own training with a lot of my athletes, right? It's like the body doesn't know the difference. Like the body doesn't know the difference between a front squat or a hack squat. All it knows is intensity and loading pattern and the stimulus that's being provided. So if you go to my Instagram page and you look, like we're doing a lot of seated leg curls, a lot of seated calf raises. I prioritize the hack squat over most of my athletes than I do traditional barbell squatting patterns. And I do it because at the end of the day, the most important thing is I don't want to be right. Okay. I want to get it right. And getting it right, if I'm thinking about it from that perspective, I begin to see that like rep ranges, training tactics, exercise selection, the very tool I'm using to elicit an outcome, all of those things are just tools in the toolbox. And I'm not going to let any preconceived notions around what population does or doesn't use those items keep me from eliciting the response I need to get, because I've got this NFL player for 8 weeks and it's a contract year. You know what I mean? So yeah, I hope I answered the question. Bit of a rant.
No, the best guests always kind of take things around with it. A few kind of quick notes. One, because you also work with a fair number of basketball players too, right? I know
I do.
Podcast co-host Zach Zillner. I think he's really heavy into basketball, but
Yes.
like a lot of basketball players, hey, tall, that's the phenotype they show up as. So therefore, what do we often have? Long femurs. Long femurs don't, on average, work super well with barbell back squatting. You just train enough people, you just see it. So you pop them in a hack squat, you get the training adaptation because we want strong quads. Second thing I was going to say, I mean, I'm dating myself here, but I grew up watching Karl Malone, David Robinson, Alonzo Mourning, Anthony Mason. It's like, I saw some post and it's like, oh, look, like now, what is it? Like LeBron plays in a more physical era now. I'm like, give me a break. The guys that Michael Jordan had to play against, Shaquille O'Neal, young Shaquille O'Neal.
Reek, so strong.
And these guys were jacked. Now, you know what? There was no testing for performance enhancing drugs back then. And so you kind of wonder, there's certain ones I'm like, I mean, hey, I grew up on like the baseball, like the Bonds, the Sosa, the Mark McGwire era. You get guys like, and I'm totally drifting here now, but guys like Ken Caminiti, who was like known for, I think, flying down to, I think it was the Dominican with like plane loads of stuff that he was getting. And he was dead, I think, in his early 40s from the stuff he used. Show up one season next with like 50 pounds of muscle on. It's like, how did that happen? But at the same time, these guys were also like the best in their sport, right? Now, there's also, hey, I love Gabe Kapler. Was the manager of the Giants for a while. He's this bodybuilder on the cover of bodybuilding magazines. But he was a jack dude. He wasn't quite the elite pro that as a prospect he was supposed to be. So muscle doesn't guarantee anything. But we also see lots of people who've been super muscular. And then I don't even have to talk about football players and muscularity. At the end of the day, bigger bodies can produce more force. They can absorb more force. And when you've got a game like the NFL, which is as physical as it gets, as speed oriented as it gets, again, just look at how most of the best running backs in history have all been built. They're like the bus, right? So,
and the truth is, building muscle for most athletes, until you get to that elite pro level, and I'm talking most athletes, training to build muscle is going to solve most of your problems. You still want to sprint, you still want to jump, but like that is a button you can press for a long time. And that's why strength and conditioning programs are so important and why they work. Building muscle, being stronger makes a difference, and it improves athleticism. Now, where people run into issue is when they only spam those things, right? And they're not doing other areas and aspects of training, but more specifically, sprinting regularly, changing direction regularly, playing the very sport it is that you're trying to get better at, regularly doing plyometric exercises, medicine ball throws, things where you can train also the quality to express force and power quickly and efficiently. When you only train to lift weights, that can be, it can turn into a limiting factor, right? If you're not doing those other things. But even then, like that's only once you're getting, like if you're in high school and you're lifting like a bodybuilder, but that's probably the best thing you could do. You should be doing those other things, of course. But yeah, building muscle is almost always a good thing for sports performance.
And we know that building muscle, for everybody, very important for long-term metabolic health, movement capacity and independence as we get older. And I think more and more people, like a lot of what you're referring to is through the lens of like high performance athletes. But I mean, I don't see high performance athletes and everyday people as this dichotomy, but more as places on a spectrum of where we are in life. And if you think about everyday living, it's still like type of performance. We just kind of regress down the intensity, let's just say. So we've got building muscle for metabolic capacity for all kinds of markers of health, right? Now, what about speed, power, explosiveness? you obviously take those and you do that stuff with your athletes. That's probably one of the most important things you're doing. How would you approach the everyday person who kind of maybe especially has a narrative, well, I'm starting to get a little bit older. I have to avoid those things because I could get hurt. It's like, no, motherfucker.
Other way around.
Yeah, other way around. So talk to me about
And those
how
are the
you
first things to go.
yeah. So talk to me about how you would approach maybe some specific tactics, but how you approach getting buy-in and training those qualities for, someone who's 30s, 40s, 50s, older, just wants to stay healthy, move well.
So to your point, like I think I want to address something real quick. I'm going to go
Sure.
into detail to answer your question, but you said something and you're spot on. People think that the training for athletes and the training for Gen Pop is drastically different. And the truth is it's not. Like maybe the amount of time spent training, right? The frequency of training may look different, but what constitutes training, particularly for longevity, performance, ability to move and have domain over your body, most of those things are virtually identical. And you touched on something that's really important for the average person who is invested in their health, who wants to live long, happily, and maybe look and feel good while doing it, right? Things like sprinting, throwing med balls, doing something more dynamic like a sled push as fast as you can, right? Those type 2 muscle fibers that are developed and maintained through those processes are the things that go the quickest when we're inactive or not using them. Point blank, period. It's been proven time and again. So the only way to ensure that those type 2 muscle fibers are going to be as high, which by the way, type 2 muscle fibers are associated with the ability to be able to sprint, jump, run, throw. Being able to maintain those qualities well into the later years of your life. I've said something recently. It's been a mantra where training to be athletic is longevity training. Like training to continue to be able to do whatever you want to do with your body is longevity training. Because if you can sprint, jump, do push-ups, sprint with a sled, like falling is not that scary. You know what I mean? And like falling is like a leading cause of death, truly, particularly in the elderly, right? So how do we go about doing those things and implementing those things to someone who maybe hasn't been doing those things, who's interested in doing those things, but is scared of getting hurt? So I would say one thing is using common sense. And for example, if you have not run a 40-yard sprint and you're in your mid 30s or mid 40s or mid 50s, even since you were in high school, don't start there, right? There are ways to reduce certain activities where you can still get a great stimulus. You can reintroduce them without spiking the risk of injury. An easy way to start sprinting again is to find a hill. The greater the incline of that hill, the less speed you're going to be able to produce, which is going to be a good thing in the beginning. And then what you can do is once you feel like you have confidence at a certain degree, you can slowly find a hill that's more and more parallel and get to a place where you're able to run a 20 or 30-yard sprint on a flat football field or a grass surface or whatever. And then the next step would be taking that to a track. As far as something like plyometrics, you can start with just a regular box jump. Most people, I would imagine listening to this, can do a box jump. And then you can progress that all the way to like a hop, a broad jump, single leg hops. And the beauty about plyos is that you can actually auto-regulate the intensity on all of them, right? You're the captain of the ship. How high and far you jump is completely within your control. A good way to reintroduce those things safely is to focus on timing and rhythm. So if I'm jumping too high or too far, as the case may be, and I'm unable to maintain timing and rhythm, I'm moving outside of what I'm capable of doing right now with mastery and expertise. Stay at that level for another week or two, and then allow yourself to jump a little higher or farther as the case may be, with the emphasis on maintaining that rhythm and timing. And then the last thing would be like, just moving lighter weights fast You know, that's a really good way to develop the ability to express power. Um, AMRAP sets, I use AMRAP sets all the time. I'll take 80% of a top set with athletes gen pop, and I'll just say, I want you to do as many reps as possible, move the bar as fast as possible. So yeah, those are a few ways that I think anyone could probably start implementing this stuff pretty quickly.
And embedded within all that, and you said it pretty explicitly, is finding ways to like limit someone from moving at max velocity with some sort of resistance. So when you're throwing a medicine ball, this big thing, and lighter ones I find are actually much better than heavier ones, whether it's throws, side scoops, etc., throwing up in the air, slamming it to the ground, that stuff's really good. I've got a 17-year-old MMA client, and he's at a phase where he just wants to put on muscle, but I'm still starting. The first thing in all of his workouts is still a speed or explosiveness exercise. And I'm actually using a sled sprint as his leg day warm up, a little bit of that. And I'm also building up, because he's brand new to me, building up the load intensity and volume of these things. But the sled, and there's a little bit of load on here. He's a pretty strong kid. I mean, it's limiting. He can't get at top speed. He just can't.
Yes.
So that's it right there. Another tactic, and I picked this up, I mentioned this a few times on air. I was listening to Stu McMillan talking on Huberman about a lot of the sprint stuff, but in particular skips. So alternating like leg to leg to leg to leg skips, right? We're not talking skipping rope, which I think is great, but just skips. And so I went out and did this stuff. And but by skipping on one leg, it's a limiter of just how high you can get, which therefore how much force you're absorbing. But you could near maximally exert like a single leg jump via a skip as a coordinated like gait cycle movement. I'm getting a little technical here for people. So there's movement quality stuff there. And the shit gets your heart rate up too, funny enough. You don't need a lot of it. But again, ease into these things. Don't do a whole lot, and then just gradually build up week over week.
100%.
Right. And like this stuff works great for gen pop, but this is also the same stuff generally that you're doing with the high level athletes or pieces of a puzzle, right? Not everybody has to Olympic lift.
It's the exact same stuff. And like when it comes to sprints, like, the difference between like a guy that I'm helping get ready for the NFL Combine and someone who's been training me for some time, and they're at a place where they can sprint on flat ground and they feel confident and comfortable doing that. The only difference is the speed. That's it. It's the speed in which they're able to do it. For the plyos, like, am I going to have a wide receiver who can broad jump 2-3 feet farther than the average gen pop person? Of course. But they're both broad jumping, and that's awesome. You know what I mean? So yeah, the reason that the pro guys are playing in the pros is because they're capable of doing it at that speed and at that distance, right? And these things are kind of innate to what it is that they're capable of doing. But man, there is nothing more awesome than rediscovering some of those things that you used to be able to do flippantly without even thinking twice, and reintroducing those things back into your training regimen. It's empowering, it's fun. And most of these things don't take much time. And then being able to maintain those in a training program. And as we age, right, being able to still like sprint or jump, it's an awesome thing to be able to do.
You said something there, and this makes sense. Even with someone who's been spending a lot of time strength training, building muscle, do you think that the loss of athleticism is more just not doing athletic shit and athletic movement?
I think that that's entirely it. And I think that it makes a lot of sense, right? Like if I don't dribble a basketball for a really long time, and then I go and play pickup basketball with my friends, I'm going to lose the ball a lot. And that's just the skill component of the sport itself. Anyone who has ever played any sport, whether it's table tennis or, or football or anything at all, you take time away from it and then you come back and you're a little rusty. It's going to take you some time to get back into it. Well, physical qualities and the ability to express yourself at the most extreme levels of speed or power, if you don't do those things, you're going to lose the ability to do them well. And like an easy way to think about it is like, if you don't use it, you lose it. It just is what it is. If you stop lifting weights and you don't work out and you do it for long enough, you're going to lose some gains. But like, if you've done those things in the past and you did it for long enough and you have the motor learning and the ability to get back into it, you can reclaim those things. And it can feel insurmountable anytime you return back to introducing something that you once used to do. And it's even harder, right? It's like, Andrew, I'm sure at some point in time in your career, you've been injured. I know I have. And I've had taken an indefinite amount of time off. Well, that first session back at the gym, it's a bummer, right? Because I'm looking at the weights that I used to do easily, and I know I'm not going to get anywhere close to those. What used to be my warm-up weights are going to be my top set. I'm 15 pounds lighter. I'm not in love with my physique. It's not where I used to be, right? Well, those are all the same feelings when someone wants to start sprinting or jumping again for the most part. But you can be surprised at how quickly you can reclaim some of that. Now, if you were, a high level athlete as a high schooler in college and you've taken a 20-year break, are you ever going to get back to college form? Probably not. Are you going to be able to still do those things and do them well? Absolutely.
Let's just say that at 47, I relate to the guys who would say, oh, back in my day, I could bench this or squat this. I'm like, yeah, I remember when I could bench three plates, squat 5 plates, etc. It's like, I've been messing around with like the big barbell lifts in a little while. So, but that's okay. I know I've done it, but I also don't talk like the guys that we make fun of, because I'm just not going to be that guy. We already talked a little bit about this, but are there any other tools, movements, type of exercise philosophies from the strength and conditioning world you wish you would see more of in general population training?
Oh man, that's a great question. Apart from sprinting, jumping, and prioritizing, because I think as a general theme, I would love to see more of an emphasis in Gen Pop on performance in general. Because I don't see them as like this line in the sand necessarily. Like I think many people, particularly who spend a lot of time in the performance realm, do, where it's like, and even like the terminology we use, right? We say Gen Pop, and then we say athletic population, And I would love to see that line get more blurred and someone kick that line in the sand. And because there's so much about training like an athlete, air quotes, and investing in performance the same way you would invest in, your total volume going up week to week, in a traditional, muscle building training block or something, right? Or like, last week at 2 reps in reserve, I was able to get 13 reps on my first set. And this week now I was able to do 14. Well, I would love for that same sort of metric and emphasis on prioritizing those things to bleed over from the athletic world into the Gen Pop world and say, you know what? Hey, I ran a little faster this week too. Or you know what? I did a broad jump and I jumped 2 inches farther than I did last week, which by the way, is what I'm doing that's what I do with my people. Yeah.
How do you balance the focus on a behavior goal and not just getting hooked on the outcome goal? Because, hey, how fast I ran, how far I jumped, those are outcomes which are harder to directly control. We still have to guide the behaviors that will lead to those outcomes. How do you dance around that?
So ultimately, like when I'm crafting a session or a training program or a block, I think a lot of coaches get this wrong still. The North Star always has to be what's most important to them. What is their goal, right? What do they want to get out of this time? And so while having the conversation around like, okay, here's where we're headed, right? Here's what you want. And then crafting a program that reflects that and being able to have that conversation, be like, look, this is why we're doing the things that we're doing. Here's how that's moving you towards where you want to be. So like, that's like level 1. And in order to do that, like I think coaches, everybody, but coaches can be a bit ambitious, or they have things that they feel like are so important that they have to put in a program that maybe don't necessarily move the needle for that person to get to where they want to go. So for example, like I love max velocity sprints, Andrew, love them. Am I going to program fly max velocity 10 sprints for someone whose entire goal is just body composition? Probably not. Right? Now, could they do a sled sprint? Right? You know what I mean? Could they eventually get there? Sure. Right. But the conversation around that stuff, and this is, I'm going to answer your question now pointedly. The conversation goes from, hey, look, the goal for you isn't to, run a sub 1 second 10-yard fly, right? Or run a 4.840, right? This is where we are. This is where we're starting. But the cool thing is like, if we do this long enough, you're going to be able to then graduate to this, and like celebrating those little victories along the way, all the while folding with respect where it is that they actually want to go. So like my body composition client who just wants to be able to reclaim some of those athletic things while all the while moving them towards losing 15 pounds of body fat and adding 5 pounds of muscle, for example, or just like, they want a nice looking ass, Andrew. That's it. That's the goal, baby. Right? We can celebrate progress of all these other things and get excited about the process. Like, oh, I know that if I just keep doing this, I'm going to be able to move well and move efficiently and do more than I've been able to do in 10, 15 years. Right? But the main thing is still the main thing. And as long as you can prioritize that and layer in some of that other stuff. And then here's the caveat too, though. I've had clients, Gen Pop clients, go to me like, I don't want to jump. I don't want to sprint. I don't care about that stuff. You know what I'm saying, Andrew? Great. Okay. We won't do those things, right? We won't. Listen, you can have someone get on an Airdyne bike and sprint for 10 seconds. You know what I'm saying? There's ways around that you can give training adaptations without actually making people do stuff, I guess is my point. So yeah, the mantra is always what's most important to them? How am I getting them there? And then just celebrating the little victories along the way. And the outcome is gonna be the outcome. I think if you can celebrate and be genuinely excited for them as they hit those victories along the way, it almost works like there's a saying, you can't transmit what you don't got, right? So if I don't have a cold, I can't give you a cold, right? But if I'm excited and I'm providing proof and value and all these little steps and all these little victories that you're getting along the way, then more often than not, that person's going to start to see and feel the value of those things. And then you can kind of build a relationship where someone falls in love with training. And you know what I mean? That's what I want. I want the person I'm working with to have such a great experience and to have such an understanding of where we're headed, why we're doing the things we're doing, and why all these little victories matter, that they fall in love with training. And when we get to that outcome, or if we don't, at least they've fallen in love with this thing.
That's my guiding star right there with all clients. That is priority number one. They fall in love with it. They stick around. Then they start discovering these other things. They realize what their body can do. And it might even change the narrative about what they think they can do. So they may be open to embracing more, quote, athletic dynamic movement that at first they had some sort of like story about here's why I can't do this. To your point as well, you mentioned how like getting someone body composition, performance, and having a bigger ass, all roads go to the same place on that one. Those things tend to almost doesn't matter which way you approach that. As long as you're doing the fundamentals, you tend to get all those results, right?
This is true. Yes.
Right? Usually if your body composition improves, usually you're going to be faster, right? You're carrying less fat. You got a little bit more muscle. Excellent. Here's another fun part that part of this conversation I would like to tap into, and I'll read the quote you wrote. Quote, warning, personal opinion coming in hot. Unless you're at or very close to your ceiling as an athlete, sport-specific training outside of actually practicing your sport event skill is a waste of time, end quote.
Yeah.
Talk to me.
So when we look at, and I kind of touched on this earlier, for most athletes, and let's just say you're not a pro athlete or you're not an Olympian, okay? For most athletes, people can shoot, people can dribble, people can catch a ball. The biggest differentiating factor are their physical abilities. Because I got to tell you, you're a running back and like maybe you don't have the best hands, but if every time you get the ball in your hands, you're running over people or you're so fast they cannot get a hand on you, you are fucking physically dominant and imposing, you're going to be all right. Now, on the other hand, you have the best hands in the world. But if every time you catch the ball, you get absolutely obliterated, you get dropped every time someone gets a hand on you, and you're too damn slow to even get open. So what's the matter of having good hands in the first place? You see what I mean? Now let's say the playing field even, okay, and you're at a D1, and I'll just stick with the football analogy. Okay, the differentiator. Let's say everyone has the same skill set, right? The differentiator is still almost always going to be the physical abilities. Which, by the way, this is the reason why we have a combine, right? Like, there are so many people at the collegiate level who are so gifted. They're such good route runners, Andrew. They have such good hands. You could throw something at them, and it's like they have super glue on their hand that, you know what I mean? They're never going to drop a pass. It doesn't matter if you are not able to be physically imposing or you don't possess special physical qualities. When you get to something at like the highest level of sport, now everyone is just as fast as you. Now everyone's just as strong as you. And the thing that really makes the difference is the skill. That's when you can start making the argument that, like, okay, more air quote sport specific training can actually give you an edge. But if you're in high school, right, and you're doing jump shots with a weighted basketball because it's somehow going to improve your ability to be a better shooter, we are so misguided and off the mark. We're light years away from that even being a consideration of something that's going to tangibly move the needle for you to get on the court, stay on the court, and eventually get a scholarship, right? And even then, like, let's look at like javelin throwers, right? I forget the name of the device, but there's this machine. It's just a handle and it's at a 45-degree angle, and they throw this motherfucker, and they can do repeated reps like that. And they have to eccentrically control it, and then reverse it as hard as they can. And it is almost an exact replica of the throwing angle of the javelin, the event itself, right? What people don't see, and even in that context, like, that is something that is entirely sport specific, that makes sense, that could help this person improve, right? People see that and they think, I should have my 19-year-old do that. It's like, no, this person, this Olympian, did hang cleans, jerks, snatches, overhead presses, and threw the javelin 10,000 times before they ever got to a place where doing that made sense to hopefully add a couple of meters onto a throw, right? Or maybe a meter at best. So that's what I mean when I say that. Like, and I also think too, it's like the sports specific training has gotten so insane where it's like, here's a sports specific balance exercise, and it's someone standing on one foot on a Bosu ball, throwing a ball against a wall, right? You know what I mean? But then on the other end, it's like, there are things hiding in plain sight that are sport specific. Like, for a sprinter, putting a sled behind your back and loading that sucker up and doing some heavy resistant sprints, that's a sport specific exercise. But it's more common and people don't view it that way, right? So yeah, there's a spectrum. I think there's a time and place. Most people are never going to be in their sport long enough to find that time or be good enough to be in that place.
And I also interpreted the statement to mean that, well, through the lens of we all have a limited amount of time and a recovery capacity, that trying to turn the in the gym exercises into mirrors of what's going on the court, on the field,
Totally.
both going to probably suboptimally load, suboptimally develop force production, suboptimally develop cardiovascular stamina, your conditioning training, muscle development, etc., but also not be as good as just practicing the sport. So to me, it's like, it's taking away from the time, the recovery, and you're just not going to get as good results. And I mean, most of the people listening probably won't be going from an off season into an in season. I'm probably going to ask Zach Zillner more in depth on this particular question, because I still think there's value here. But if you are a seasonal athlete, you are better off during your main portion of your off season going into more general physical preparedness, pure strength, developing these properties. We talked about speed, athleticism. And then as you get into preseason, you can transition more into trying to be in the environment and the conditions of the sport, That's definitely the case in MMA. That Joel Jameson talks a lot about this in his course and his media. But that's smart if you're dealing with this. But again, for the person who plays sports at a recreational level, I mean, I'm not convinced there's any value in the sport specific in the gym stuff. I think you're just better off getting strong, fast, explosive, and then playing, developing the skills of your sport directly.
I couldn't agree more. And like it's very rarely, particularly when it comes to training, it's very rarely where you can do one exercise or one movement and it check a lot of boxes. In fact, I would caution people to be wary of that, because so often we think it's like, oh, by doing insert exercise, I'm doing it's sport specific, where I'm doing a lunge, a front foot elevated lunge on a band where I'm balancing and I'm holding weights in a front rack position, right? And it's essentially like a balancing act, but it's a front lunge, right? It's like, oh, well, I'm actually training stability and stamina and proprioception. It's like, no, and strength and force direction. It's like, no, you're actually just doing a poor job of training all of those things, right? To your point, like most people are going, I mean, not most people, honestly, I hate to say absolute statements, but like everyone, everyone is going to get more ROI just from focus on getting insanely strong, getting noticeably faster, and prioritizing plyometrics and being relentless about measuring those metrics, and then spending the rest of their time actually playing and practicing sport. You're spot on.
I think we just keep it that simple. Here's another fun quote, and I want to tease out the nuance. Quote, "A truth I've discovered through experience is this: training works, particularly with athletes, good or bad exercise selection, form periodization, you name it. If intent and effort is high, you're going to get adaptation. Doesn't necessarily mean it's positive or what could have been, but it's going to happen." Break this down for me.
Yeah, man. So like, okay, I coming up, and I'm digesting all this information, and I'm learning from the people that I love. And so I shape a view around what good training is. Right. And then the longer I'm in my field and in my space, what I've seen time and again is that people do it differently than me, but they still get results. So what's the deal? What are the commonalities? What are the things that are underpinning my philosophy and their philosophy? That is, because by all intents and purposes, they shouldn't be, they're getting the similar results to me, but I think what I'm doing is better. What gives, the common underlying themes. And this kind of even goes back to the sport specific conversation, where it's like the exercise itself almost always isn't as important as the effort you're putting into that exercise, right? Front squat, back squat, hack squat. You can do any squat variation you want. It doesn't matter as much, though, as taking it to a place that's going to elicit a training response, right? Whether I decide to do a 3-day-a-week program or a 4-day-a-week program, because, these are the questions I get. It's like, what's the perfect split? If I want to get faster, what's the perfect? Everyone wants the answer to the perfect thing. I'm sorry, it's just no answer. That doesn't exist. And I think more people, it's like, it's perfectionism, really. It's just like, oh, well, if I'm not doing the best thing, then I'm not going to do it at all. Wrong. You're much better doing a poor program and doing it precisely as it's laid out with all your effort, as hard as you can. And I know even from personal experience, Andrew, I'm not the coach I used to be. I used to suck. And my athletes still got great results because I was able to get them to believe in it. And they felt that if they worked hard and did their best, they'd get results. And it wasn't because the program was good. It's because they were working hard and taking training seriously. So that's what I mean by that.
You made me think of two things. The first one is something that I've heard Ben Bruno say. It's like, the people who are elite athletes, they come to you, they're already freaks. So one of the most important things is just not getting them hurt. And that's a separate conversation.
100%.
But you also made me think, like, and I'm not deep down the rabbit hole on like sprint mechanics. I don't know the depths of it, but 3 of the names that, and I've had 2 of them on my podcast way, way, way back in the past. Derek Hansen, Justin Kavanaugh, and Stu McMillan. And you've got 3 of the most well-known sprint coaches in the world And while I don't know the nuts and bolts, I know that they have different philosophies, probably a lot of overlap. And guess what? They're all producing elite athletes.
You nailed it. And like, I mean, I'm telling you, I think there's a common misconception that because a trainer or a coach works with a big book of professional athletes or high profile athletes.
Joel Sieben. Sorry, Joel. I feel bad, but Joel
You
Sieben.
nailed it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. That they're good at their job, or they have even a fundamental understanding of what's generally accepted to be like, sound principles of training. Right. But people keep coming back and people get results. So, it does beg the question, what are the things that are really the most important? And and here's the other thing, Andrew. I think I'll speak for myself. I want to feel like what I'm doing is important, and like the decisions I'm making around exercise selection, all these things really matter. And believe me, I believe that they do, right? Long term. But I think the truth is they don't matter as much as I want them to, as much as I would like them to. The things that matter the most. And then it becomes a separate conversation of like, okay, well, if intensity, intent, managing fatigue, all of these things are actually, the quote unquote secret sauce, right? Maybe that's the cake. And then real good programming is actually the icing, right? How do I create an environment where I can ensure my athletes are in a space and in a mindset where they are excited to show up and compete and put the best version, or my gym clients, when they walk in the door, they know hell fucking yeah, we're ready to throw down, baby. Like, you know what I mean? Like we're going to have an awesome workout and so a lot of my training, the way I structure things, the way that I organize a session all the way, movement, week to week, block to block, I'm thinking about that stuff. Like what are going to be low hanging fruit ways to keep people engaged and to prioritize bringing the necessary amount of energy and effort to every set and rep that's going to move the needle. And then, it takes the pressure off a little bit. If someone says to me, it's like, well, I don't want to do this particular movement because I don't like it, or I don't feel comfortable, or it causes me discomfort in whatever insert way. I can say, no big deal. We'll find another way. And then we're going to bring what we need to bring to it to make it work.
The original quote, almost, I certainly interpret, implies that if you're focused on the wrong things, then you can also have undesirable adaptations. Is there an element to that? Is there anything, maybe a visceral example or something that you intended with that?
I think like particularly when it comes to athletic populations, if I only prioritize treating a certain quality, and that is like my specialty, or if that's what I'm known for, you know what I mean? And I look at insert quality as being like, the king quality relative to everything else. I'm probably going to have some blind spots, right? And particularly in performance spaces, it's been like, oh, well, so-and-so is a weight room guy, which typically means like sprinting and jumping. They're just not as important. Their guys are going to just focus on getting strong. And then that pendulum can swing the other way, right? And the difficulty with that is like, sometimes it works where it's just like, this is like, we're going to spam this button and everything else is sort of an afterthought, but it works like on a statistical basis. Like if you have a team of 80 guys, it's going to work for a lot of them, right? And maybe some of the other guys don't get quite as good results as they could, but they did okay, right? Because you're seeing a lot of changes on a stat sheet, right? Numbers are going up. Some guys got better. That's all the confirmation bias you need, right? On the other end of the spectrum, there are coaches who don't prefer the weight room at all, but they're going to sprint their athletes, 4 times a week. They're going to do a shit ton of plyos. And like the guys who need that in their training, or who are genetically predisposed to responding really well to that, are going to do so. And then maybe like there's a big portion of the team that like doesn't quite get what they needed and they don't respond as well. Right. And so I think it's probably just a good idea to stay balanced. Um, I'm a big believer in like, if I'm working with someone on an individual basis or even in a small group setting, I can get a pretty good idea of like what qualities we need to lean into more than others. And so I can toggle things up and down. Right. Um, but I think at certain points in my career, I've been all of those guys where it was like, particularly early on, it was just being strong, building muscle. It's the only thing that matters. Well, no. And then later on, it was like plyos. If you're not doing, and then speed. And then, past several years, I've been able to reconcile. It's like all of these things. It's like having a soup. And the longer I've been coaching, the more I understand what can make an athlete go or what they're missing and what they need and what they're already good at. I can give them just enough to stay good at the things that make them great and focus on more giving them the things that they need to get to that next level. And then I can kind of move the toggles on those things for them. I hope I answered the question.
This has been great. So I've got one last thing I want to dive into because I think this one might be useful for everybody. What traits, attitudes, behaviors do you often see correlate, hard to say causal, with athletes who go on to be successful in sport and life versus maybe some of the ones that crash and burn a little bit?
Well, I thought I had this question pegged before you finished it, but then you threw me a curveball. You said success at sport and life. That narrows the margins. Because when you guys are successful in their sport, but aren't necessarily happy with their lives,
Mike
right?
Tyson, Allen Iverson, the list goes on and on. I remember Antoine Walker with the Boston Celtics a way back.
Oh God.
There are a lot of guys who burn through all their money.
A strong sense of self. That's usually associated with people who prioritize relationships, who prioritize their values over everything else, regardless of what those values are. Those two qualities, because here's the thing, like to be successful, there are certain guys that I've trained that are just freaks and they're going to be good at their sport no matter what. But the guys who are really, really good, they start to and are in the gym and they're working for it and it means everything to them. What I've also found, if they're the kind of person who also prioritizes their values and have a strong sense of who they are and who they want to be, that blend is almost an unstoppable force because the lessons that you learn as a byproduct of trying to compete at the highest level around what it means to sacrifice and to be dedicated and to be selfless and at sometimes selfish, combine with the character makeup of someone who prioritizes other relationships, but knows precisely who they are and what's important to them. That like trifecta in a person, they can do anything. And even, and let's say that's the kind of person who, if their sport's taken away from them tomorrow, they pop an Achilles and ACL, they're never the same. They're going to go on to do great things once that sport is over. I think a lot of people, and a lot of it is just a byproduct of being so young. I mean, Andrew, Jesus, I didn't get sober until I was in my mid-20s. If I had $1 million at age 20, I wouldn't be here. There's no way. I'd be dead, brother. I wouldn't be here. I didn't know who I was, man.
It would have been the hangover every weekend.
Right. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't know anything about anything. But there are certain people every once in a while who come into your life. And even at that young age, it's like, whoa, this dude or this woman knows who they are. They know what they want and they've got the ability to go do it. Right. So yeah, those are the commonalities for people who are successful at sport and life. They have a strong sense of self and what's important to them in their moral system. And they value relationships and people.
Is there a sweet spot for ego? Too much, really dangerous, not enough, not driven?
See, I think ego gets a bad rap. And I say this as someone who, as a part of a recovery program, your ego is kind of considered your worst enemy. But the ego is entirely necessary. And the truth is that most people who are really successful owe that in part to ego. You know what I mean? Like that is part of the equation. And I think like there's just like a stigma around that word because it's kind of just become like, when people say that, they think of the embodiment of someone who's just in love with themselves, right? And kind of like insufferable and like a narcissist. That's not what I'm talking about. Like there's a reason we've evolved to have ego. It is important. The devil's in the dosage, right? As with anything else. And so, yeah, like that ego, like, and I think like the healthiest form of ego people receive as supreme confidence. That's the way it comes off. Supreme confidence. And you look at people, look at Kobe Bryant, look at Michael Jordan. Those guys' egos were out of fucking control, but they're celebrated. They're celebrated as being supremely confident. When in fact, I guarantee you, at times they were totally insufferable, particularly Mike. You know what I mean? So I think the context, and I think there's a larger conversation here, like societal values and what we, celebrate and what's important. But yeah, like, for me personally, like there's been a large portion of my life, like I've been able to do some cool stuff. But part of the motivating factor in that is the fear that I'm not good enough. Like fear has served me a little bit, Andrew. You know what I mean?
That's fuel. That is fuel right there. I know Hormozy talks a lot about that one.
So yeah, and here's the thing. It's going to be hard to have that killer instinct, that desire, that drive to be great at something and it not get out of bounds sometimes. But again, if you have someone who has a strong sense of self, who also prioritizes relationships, the people in their lives that they love and care about will be able to rein them in and say, hey man, yeah, not always, but.
No, it's a beautiful place to leave off. Everybody can find you on Instagram at Tim Riley Training. What are the resources you got for people? Obviously, there's a Coach 'em Up podcast. Got to give that a shout because, and this is something I'm doing. So this is probably for the coaches here. I enjoy listening to podcasts. I was doing research, obviously, but I was on your guys' podcast first. And again, you've had great guests like Dr. Mike Isertel's been on a few times, and you've had Chad Wesley Smith, who's great. The list goes on and on. Your girlfriend, Kelly Matthews, who's got a social media following. It's like almost like 10 times the size of yours, which is, I would love to have a conversation, but that's got to be fun to deal with. She's brilliant. There's a viral clip about, and I've heard Jordan Shallow talk about this before. I feel this for sure, where it's like a lot of the content is just like someone stitching someone else and criticizing stuff. And I think it's almost like a backlash, and I think coaches are getting too addicted to it. But this is very coach centric, but here's a lesson. When I hear good hosts, I pay attention. I learn and study, and I want to take lessons from good hosts. And you can tell with the way, I don't know if I've ever had a guest who's used my name as much as you have, and that's not an accident. So you make people feel important. He's smiling for the audio listeners. He knows that stuff's okay. So take lessons from this. So I know there are podcast hosts listening. Ruby, I'm talking about you. I'll give you a shout out to Ruby. Ruby's a sweetheart. And Ruby was asking me this sort of stuff. So go listen to what Tim and Zach are doing with the Coach 'em Up podcast. And especially if you're a coach who's really interested in like, high level performance, you want to get better. This is magic. So guys, go check that out. What else you got for people?
Oh man, dude, I think you nailed it. Yes. Coach 'em Up podcast on YouTube, Spotify, follow me on Instagram, follow the Coach 'em Up podcast page on Instagram. And yeah, man, shoot me a DM, shoot the podcast page a DM. And, looking forward to having Andrew on the show in the future too.
Right. So, I used to do a thing where I would hide, and it depends on the thing. Until something was official, I would hide it. I wouldn't talk about it, wouldn't mention it. Here I am wearing my Table Talk t-shirt. I was on Dave Tate's Table Talk I flew down in February and it got aired, and it was awesome. So, but I would just hide this from the world. If I was getting a new publication, because I've had stuff fall through. I've been on the goal line and something just didn't get published. The company got sold. It's happened a couple times. So I'm not bragging about shit until, I'm not sharing shit because it comes off as bragging until it's official. But yeah, so we're going to actually off the air now, orchestrate the fine details on this one. I can't wait to come down. I'm going to be in Austin in August anyway, because I'll be boots on the ground for RP Strength event, and they're one of my sponsors. So shout out RP Strength, Hypertrophy app, Genius Shot, it's all great stuff. And I'm going to go hang out with those guys. My guys are telling my buddies, Nick Shaw, Chris Guevara. But anyway, we should be able to orchestrate getting me on there. So we're going to go talk now. Everybody listening, go follow Tim. Check out what they're doing with Coach 'em Up podcast. Thanks, guys, for tuning in. Show some love for my sponsors. Talk to you next time.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I put a ton of work into bringing you industry-leading guests. I also put a ton of work into my coaching programs. Registration is now open for my Forever Strength 13-week online women's strength program. It starts Monday, June 30th, but secure your spot today. I cap registration at 125 members. This round offers between 2 and 4 full body strength workouts. It's flexible for you because summers get busy and you don't want to drop your strength training completely until fall. You can choose between a gym program or a home dumbbell and TRX version. There are tons of great programs out there, but here's what sets mine apart. While my program is structured so you can function independently, I'm here when you need help. For form feedback, coaching, support, and I reply promptly, not just in 24 hours. I've heard horror stories about coaches and programs that charge high ticket prices only to have the coach take days to respond, if they even do at all. More and more coaches are trying to automate, systemize, and scale themselves out of interacting with their clients or even being a real human. You'd get better support from an app. Instead, try my support and program this summer, all for just $160 Canadian, and you can save 10% on that using the code LIFTFREE, all one word, LIFTFREE. Register at foreverstrength.ca or use a link in the show notes or message me directly on Instagram. I'll hook you up. If you're a coach, you're welcome to. We often put our own training last, and it's nice to have a plan and support when you need it. And you're welcome to join to experience how I run my program. Registration closes Monday, July 7th.